Hey everyone, this is a deck tech guide on Rhinar. I just wanted to give some thoughts and a little bit of discussion around the hero. This is a list that I was able to make a top 8 with at my local ProQuest. Well, okay, not somewhat local. It was over a 3-hour drive to a very close neighboring state, but we'll still call it somewhat local, I suppose. But we were able to go into top 8 with this, which I think is really cool because there's a lot of people who like Rhinar but are not very convinced about his viability in the meta. And so I'm in a very competitive area for Flesh and Blood, and I just wanted to kind of, I guess, shed some light on a deck list and a style of play that was able to get me into the top 8. And what's notable is that we did not play against Prism at all that entire day, including the top 8, because I actually brought this anticipating Prism and anticipating a fairly good matchup into that deck. And I knew there were going to be people piling in it. There were going to be people playing it. There were even like players locally who were switching over to the deck last minute because it was looking to be a very good counter to Starvo. So I felt very confident about this. And then round 1, we played in one against the Lexi. Round 2, we played in one against the Starvo, barely. Round 3 was a win against Briar. Round 4 was a win against Viserai. And then rounds 5 and 6 were both losses to Viserai. So we barely bubbled into top 8. I was the only 4-2 in top 8. It was mostly just because the people I lost to did very, very well in Swiss. My first loss was a Viserai player who went undefeated. Unfortunately, we would be paired again in the first game in top 8, and Rhinar is just not very good into Runeblade, so unfortunately, we didn't progress past that, which kind of sucks because the Prisms were there. The Prisms were in top 8. There were 2 Prisms who made it in there, and we just somehow didn't get that matchup the entire day. But we were able to make top 8 with Rhinar in the face of a bunch of Runeblades. So putting us more Runeblades a day than anything else. So just wanted to kind of break it down and then kind of give a comprehensive plan with Rhinar, and then also go over a sideboard guide as well. And so we're going to start with Rhinar. So Rhinar's ability, for anyone who's unfamiliar and maybe just checking out this hero and has found this video, Rhinar's ability is that whenever you discard a card with power 6 or more during your action phase, so your turn basically, you're going to intimidate. And the intimidate is a keyword that says that target hero is going to banish a card from their hand randomly face down for the whole turn, and they'll get it back when the turn ends basically. There's some like nuance with the rules, but we'll just say it like that. Basically, they're going to lose a card from their hand and they can't use it, so they can't if it's a defense reaction, they can't play it. If it's an instant speed card, they can't play it. If it's just a normal blocking card, they can't block with it. So Rhinar has, because of this, a couple really interesting strengths. First of all, he's able to disrupt a few decks that want to kind of keep a lot of cards in hand, either mostly for blocking purposes. So if a deck wants to block with a lot of cards, Rhinar can sometimes remove multiples of them, and then that person, if they wanted to block, are only able to block with sometimes only like a couple cards, right? On average, they might have like 2 or 3 cards left to block with, and a lot of time, but sometimes, it's pretty often, they'll only have the ability to have 1 option of a card to block with, and sometimes 0. Sometimes you're actually able to discard 4 cards in a turn, and then when you attack your opponent, they have no cards left at all, and so they'd actually basically have no options to block. And so a lot of this deck is going to be based around 6 power attacks, and then cards with discarding effects, basically. So Rhinar can play either a very grindy kind of mid-range game, or depending on the matchup that you're into, can play a very aggressive style game. And so we're going to start with the equipment. So we're going to start with Spring Tunic as the generic chest equipment. Probably not a whole lot of surprises here. It's a very efficient card. Getting 1 resource every 3 turns is very strong. You can block with it later in the game if you really need to, if you need to preserve 1 life to maybe close out a game. Moving on to the headpiece, we're most likely, and pretty much almost all matchups, are going to be running Arcanite Skullcap. It's a very strong card that can block for 3, and does have the ability to pay for Arcane Barrier, which is sometimes relevant. Moving on to the legs, we have probably one of the most important cards in the deck. Well, depending on the matchup you're into, but Scabskin leathers are leg equipment. They have battle worn for 2, and a once per turn action where we can roll a 6-sided die, and we'll gain action points equal to half of the number rolled down. So what this means is that if you roll a 2, you'll get half of that rounded down, which is 1. So you'll use your action point, which you have 1 of per turn. So use your 1 action point for the turn. If you roll like a 2 or a 3, you'll get your action point back, and that's it, right? If you roll a 1, you'll actually lose your action point because 0.5 rounded down is 0. So it's a very risky move to actually roll these, and we'll talk about more, but you often don't actually want to be rolling with these at all. You normally only want to roll these when you absolutely have to. Having an extra action point is really cool. This deck doesn't have a lot of ways to get go again, so playing 2 very big attacks, which is something Rhinar likes to do, is play these massive, huge, powerful attacks. Being able to play 2 in a turn is very cool, but it's often not needed. And then what's worth mentioning is that if you roll a 4 or higher, then you're going to get 2 action points, and if you roll a 6, you'll get 3 action points actually, because it'll be half. And so with that, you'll be able to do like 3 attacks, or you can attack multiple times and use your weapon. So it's a very strong effect, but rolling the 1 is a huge downside. And so to offset that, they've actually designed a generic arm piece that is pretty much targeted right at this. So if an effect basically, if you were to roll a die for an effect, which is what Scabskins are, Gambler's Gloves lets you break it as a one-time effect and re-roll the die. So in some games where we're going to run these 4 together. And basically this allows it so that if we ever need to roll Scabskins and we get a 1, we can break the Gambler's Gloves and then re-roll. And I can speak from experience. It will happen. You will roll a 1, you will break Gambler's Gloves, and then you will re-roll a 1, which is unfortunate, and it is just part of variance you'll have to accept. Moving on to Romping Club, this is a really strong weapon in the deck. It's a 2 pitch cost to attack for 4, and if you've discarded a card with power 6 or more, it gets +1. So sometimes you can Scabskins get 2 action points. You can discard. We'll go over this very quickly, but a lot of our cards have additional costs. In addition to the resource cost, also require us to discard a random card. This is obviously very strong with Rhinar's ability and turns on the intimidate factor. But if you're able to get another action point or play a big card with go again, Romping Club will sometimes be buffed. But most of the time we're just pitching to attack for 4 because it's a very good break point. Most cards are only going to block for 3. We can look here firsthand. All these cards block for 3. Okay, TTS is freaking out. But most of these cards block for 3, right? So if we attack for 4 and our opponent doesn't want to lose 2 cards and they just want to block for 1, then we're trading 1 for 1 with them. We're trading 1 card to pitch, and they're blocking with 1 card, but they're taking 1 damage, which is really good. Moving on to the red package, we're going to start with Command and Conquer. It's a very strong generic. Most decks are going to run this. Being able to threaten your opponent's arsenal is very important in Flesh and Blood. And this is a power 6, so like, why not run it? Swing Big is a great new addition from Everfest. Swing Big is a 2 for 8 that says, if Swing Big doesn't hit, the defending hero creates a Quicken token when the combat chain closes. And a Quicken token just gives your opponent's next attack go again. Now that can seem like a pretty big downside, but the problem is most of the time that's going to require your opponent to block with 3 cards, which is a very, very big ask for your opponent, especially in the current meta with decks like Bravo Star the Show and Viserai. These are decks that do not want to lose a whole lot of cards. Even Prism, which is another top contender for the meta. These are decks that do not want to give up many cards. They're not very interested in blocking sometimes. And so Swing Big is often actually going to hit your opponent, and sometimes it won't even get the downside. And a 2 for 8 damage is crazy, especially when we get into some other things in the deck. Pack Hunt is a 2 for 6 that intimidates once when you play it. There is no discard effect, there is no on-hit effect, and there is no punishment for not hitting. So some cards will be kind of all over the place. A lot of them will have different mechanics. Basically what we care about is this is a 6 power that we can discard. It can block for 3 if we need to play more defensively, and we can keep a 2-card hand and play a 6 that will remove 1 card from our opponent's choices to block, which is really good. Barraging Beatdown, we will run all 9 of them in all 3 colors. This is probably one of my favorite cards in the deck. I absolutely love this card. So this card says, your next brute, it's a non-attack. Brute action. The next brute attack this turn gains, if this attack is defended by less than 2 non-equipment cards, it gains +4. The yellow will give it +3, and the blue will give it +2. Now, this is a 0 that intimidates your opponent on its own. So for instance, if we were to have, let's get real crazy here, right? So let's say you keep a 4-card hand, right? And you intimidate, you just play all 3 of these and you intimidate your opponent 3 times. They're now left with 1 card in hand, which means that they actually can't like block with less than 2 non-equipment cards because they only have 1 card left to block with. So you don't even have to guess. You'll know it. You know it'll happen. And then like you can pitch this or something and come in with the club. And this is an attack. It doesn't say attack action card. It just says an attack. And the romping club is a brute attack. So now the romping club is now coming in for +4 from all of these. So it's actually coming in for 16, which is crazy. And your opponent only has 1 card to block with. So it basically has dominate if you want to think about it like that. So it's great. It's great to close out games. It's great to set up bigger turns. It's great for trading damage in the mid game, even in an early game. If you get that if you get to play first, which you normally want to do in Rhinar, you can just play those if they're in your hand, and sometimes you'll actually be able to chunk your opponent really hard on turn 1. Massacre is a 3 for 6, and if it's ever discarded, to pay the cost of a brute attack action card, it actually intimidates on its own. The reason why this is important is that Rhinar's ability is separate from Massacre. So if you discard Massacre, so we actually haven't looked at any cards yet that actually discard as payment. And this says attack action, a brute attack action card. So we'll look at a card like Wrecker Romp. Wrecker Romp says an additional cost to play it, you must discard a random card. So if this is in your hand and it's randomly discarded, it'll intimidate once from Rhinar because you discarded power 6 or more, but it'll actually intimidate because it was used to pay the cost of a brute attack action card. So this in combination with the Barraging Beatdown means that you now intimidate 3 cards from your opponent, which is really strong. So we're mostly going to try to discard it, right? But you can also play on its own, and it's a 3 for 6, which is okay. But if you've discarded a card with power 6 or more this turn, it'll gain +2 and intimidate. So if you roll Scab Skins and maybe play something like this, and then you're able to play this, and now it comes in for 8 and it intimidates again, so it removes another card from your opponent's hand for the turn. Which is very, very good. And then moving on to yellows. We're going to play a lot of yellows. Not all of these are looking to be played. They're mostly here because it allows us to... a lot of the times we're going to be grinding out games. We're going to play this very long mid-rangey style game where we're maybe trying to keep 2 or 1 card hands. We're just blocking efficiently as possible, and then we're pitching 1 card to come back in for 4. And like we talked about with 4, it means our opponent's probably going to take 1 damage every time. Let's say they give us 2 cards, right? Which is really, really good for us. So we have a high yellow count. We can eventually play these if we need to. They're obviously stronger than the Romping Club on their own. So if you need them to win the game, they're there. So we just have Savage Swing. It's just a 1 for 6 that requires a discard. Riled Up is a 3 for 6 that gains +1 if you've discarded a card with power 6 or more. So you'll need action points or go again to really get the effect from that. Barraging Bighorn is a 2 for 6 that requires a random discard, but if it's defended with less than 2 non-equipment cards, it actually gains go again. So that can turn on something like Riled Up or Massacre, but if your opponent blocks with 2 cards, it'll lose go again. So you have to be kind of careful. There will be times where this card's actually pretty playable. Most of the time it's not. Wrecker Romp can sometimes close out games if your opponent's like at 1 and you're able to get 2 cards out of their hand somehow and then play this because it'll come in for 7, which is just barely enough to get over 6 block. Beast Within is one of my favorite cards in the deck. I would say my favorite cards in this deck are probably like Barraging Beatdown, Alpha Rampage, which we'll get to in a bit. Bloodrush Bellow is the best way to win with this deck. Reckless Swing is another very fun card. But Beast Within is just on a whole other level because there's not really any other effect like it in Flesh and Blood. Beast Within says if it's ever put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the combat chain. So basically if it's randomly discarded as an effect. So if you were to play Savage Swing and randomly discard Beast Within, it's been put in the graveyard, not from the combat chain itself. So when it's put into the graveyard, what you're going to do is you're going to banish the top card of your deck and you're going to lose 1 life. If it's a card with power 6 or more, it's going to go directly into your hand. If it's not, you're going to lose another life and you're going to keep on repeating the process until it happens. So basically, this is a really cool way to gain card advantage with Rhinar, because a lot of these effects actually require a card to discard, which can sometimes put you down a card. But Beast Within is actually a very cool effect that'll actually give you card advantage with the payment, with the loss of life, which is a very cool effect that's not really present anywhere else in Flesh and Blood. Barrage and Beatdown we've already talked about. Oh, and it's a power 6. So you'll discard it, you'll get an Intimidate trigger, and you'll get to draw. Blood Rush Bellow is probably the most important card in the deck. It's pretty much the linchpin of most strategies. This is the card. This is, in my opinion, the reason to play Rhinar over some other kind of grindy mid-range decks. This card is so explosive. It'll win games, it'll swing games in your favor. So let's break it down really quick. So Blood Rush Bellow is a non-attack action that blocks for 3. Pitches yellow, and it costs 1. As an additional cost to play it, you have to discard a random card. Your next brute attacks gain +2 this turn. So every brute attack in your turn will get +2. And if you've discarded a card that has power 6 or more, you'll draw 2 cards and Blood Rush Bellow will gain go again. Something I should probably mention now is what we want to do in a lot of our hands in this deck is sculpt them in a way where when we pitch and play a card that requires a discard effect, there's maybe 1 to 2 cards left in our hand, and both of those will be power 6s, right? We want to, so all these say random, and it can lead people to believing that Rhinar is a very RNG based deck. I don't believe that's true. I think you can play Rhinar in a way that's very calculated and thoughtful, and actually reduces all the variance in the deck, right? So like, let's say we have like Blood Rush Bellow, right? We have Blood Rush Bellow, we have a non-attack that does not have power 6 or more, right? And then let's just throw in 2 random power 6s, right? So someone might say, well, this seems risky to play it because you're going to discard a random card. But all you have to do is you just have to pitch the card that doesn't have power 6. You'll play Blood Rush Bellow, and now one of the 2 random options in your hand are both going to meet the requirement for Blood Rush Bellow. This goes for all the other discard effects that require you to discard something with power 6 or more. Let's say that's not even in your, let's say you just have these 2 cards, right? So you could pitch Sand Sketch Plan to play Blood Rush Bellow, and the only card left to randomly discard is Wrecker Romp. So you've completely telegraphed your turn, you've planned around everything, there is no variance, and so that allows you to actually play this deck very consistently. All of your brute attacks will get +2, so anything you come in afterwards, you'll get to draw 2 new cards. Blood Rush Bellow will get go again if for some reason you do whiff on it, which you probably shouldn't be playing it if you have the ability to whiff, but because if you do, you pretty much lose your turn. If you whiff for some reason, you will not draw 2 cards and it will not get go again, and so your turn will be over unless if you have additional action points. Smash Instinct is another yellow pitch. We'll just use it for club, just to trade damage throughout the entire game. For 3 resources, it will come in for 6 with its own Intimidate trigger, so it'll remove 1 card from your opponent's hand. High Roller is a new addition from Everfest. It's a 0 cost that intimidates, so it's a little bit like Barrage and Beatdown, but it doesn't have the additional effect of adding damage if they don't block with enough cards. But it does say if you've rolled a 6 this turn, High Roller actually intimidates twice. We're never really trying to meet that requirement. It's just a blue pitch that we'll usually use to block to grind out the game, but late game they can be good, right? Like if your opponent's a low life total and you just can't get through, High Roller is enough to remove 1 card, which is sometimes enough to do it. Speaking of closing out games, we're going to talk about probably like one of the coolest cards in the deck. I'll be saying that a lot, is Reckless Swing. So Reckless Swing is a brute defense reaction for 0 that pitches for 3. An additional cost, you have to discard a random card. If the discarded card has power 6 or more, you deal 2 damage to the attacking heroes. Physical damage, it's just damage. They can't prevent it. It's not like arcane damage or something. I guess Crown of Seeds would do it, or they could play Sigil, but a lot of times this card will actually win games. I've seen ProQuest games won with it. I've been on the receiving end of this card. I've killed people with it. It will win you games. It is worth it. It's a great card to play. A lot of times in this game, it can feel very very tied up at the end, and Reckless Swing will actually just like close out the game and your opponent will have no way to respond to it. Now, with that being said, you do not want to play this early. It's a very good card late game because it has the ability to close out the game. If you do 2 damage early and they're now at 38 instead of 40, it doesn't really affect the game the same way that it does if they're at 2 or if they're at 1, and now they just lost the game on the spot. You have to discard a random card and you need to be power 6. So for instance, if your hand is 2 sand sketch plans, we'll just keep on using this for examples, a Wrecker Romp, which is power 6, and a Reckless Swing, and you need to kill your opponent. A way to get around this is that you can actually, in the blocking phase, you can just dump all of your non-power 6s out of your hand. Like let's say they attack for 1, you can overblock for 6 and then go to reactions and play Reckless Swing. Like it's crazy, but if you need it, because now let's say we play it now after we blocked with both sand sketch plans and Wrecker Romp is the only card in our hand. Now we're going to go to discard a card at random, which is just going to be Wrecker Romp, and then we'll meet the requirement and we'll deal 2 damage to our opponent and win the game from that. So knowing how to block if you need Reckless Swing to win the game, just understanding how to block with non-attacks in your hand and then waiting until the reaction phase so that you basically dump all of the possible misses in your hand is a good way to play that card. Barrage and Beatdown we've already covered. Sand Sketch Plan is a card I keep on using for examples. And that's actually a very cool card. So Rhinar Specialization, it's actually a tutor for 0 that pitches for 3. You have to search your card for any card, doesn't specify what kind, and you put it in your hand. It's basically like if anyone's played Magic, it's like Gamble. Gamble is a 1 mana sorcery spell that lets you tutor for a card, and then when you're done tutoring, you discard a card from your hand at random. So Sand Sketch Plan is a little bit like that. You can go tutor for any card, and then you'll put it in your hand. But if you discard a card with power 6 or more, you'll actually gain 2 action points, which is really crucial in this deck. It will allow you to play like a big brute attack, and then still come in and attack with a club or some of these other bigger attacks and be able to chain them back to back. And then Wrecker Romp is just a blue pitch that is discarded for 6. So this is the overall core package of the deck. It's mostly a very grindy, slow deck. We're mostly looking to block, a lot of times block for 9. We'll block as efficiently as we can. And we'll try about once a turn to come back in with the Romping Club, which we've already talked about a lot, but the Romping Club is just very good in terms of damage output, coming in for 4. And that's kind of it. We do have a lot of these kind of bigger cards that can force our opponent to block and can actually be aggressive if we want to. The Romping Club builds are usually going to be a little bit more grindy and a little bit more slow. And then we're going to set up some Blood Rush Bellow turns, combine those with Barrage and Beatdown, and we'll be able to basically like one-shot our opponent when they get low enough. So yeah, that's the main core. It is a kind of grindy mid-range style deck that will set up very explosive turns where we just completely overwhelm our opponent with these massive, huge go tall attacks that our opponent actually can't block because of Rhinar's ability, usually removing cards from their hand. So we're going to move very quickly over the sideboard, and then we'll jump into a quick sideboard tech guide. Skullhorn is a brute equipment headpiece with Arcane Barrier 2, and you can destroy it and draw a card and then discard a random card with go again. Some people have ideas of what they can do with the action on this card. I'm not very convinced by it. It's mostly here for Arcane Barrier 2 when we need it. Null Ring Gloves is an Arcane Barrier piece where both of these will be used for different instances of matchups that deal arcane damage. Animal Claw is a very cool card. I like this card a lot. I actually like it more than Romping Club, but it's not as good into some other decks in the format. We'll jump into that in a second. Mandible Claw is a brute weapon. More importantly, it's a one-handed brute weapon. So the Romping Club is two-handed, but you can actually play 2 of these. And you'll pay 2 and you'll attack for 3. But if you discard a card with power 6 or more this turn, Mandible Claw will get go again. So if you're able to discard a card for some reason or play a card that requires a discard effect and you're able to either have another action point or go again, you can actually attack with both claws. So if you're going to attack with one claw and then the other one because they both have go again, or you can attack with both claws and then play another attack on the end. These are traditionally very well paired together because you can So club will come in for 5 and then +2 on a Blood Rush Battle turn. So it'll come in for 7, which is pretty good on one card. But the claws will come in for 5 each. So these cards are actually typically much better together. Blood Rush Battle is still really good for closing out games. You'll normally play other cards if you're, you normally won't default to the Romping Club, but you definitely can. But if you're doing the grindy builds. But the Manimal Claws are super explosive. They'll do 5 each. They'll come in for 10. You can play one more attack afterwards because they have Go Again on themselves. Really sick. Wild Ride is another card from Everfest that we're playing 2 of. The biggest reason why we're not playing 3 and why it's in the sideboard is because it actually doesn't even have a blocking value. So you actually can block with this card, which can sometimes be a liability. It's 2 for a 6. When you attack with it, you'll draw a new card and then discard a card at random. If it's 6 or more discarded, it'll gain Go Again. Right, so that's pretty good with claws. You could pitch, play this, get a new card in your hand. More importantly, it doesn't require a discard from your existing hand, so it's actually pretty neutral compared to a lot of the original Brute cards that require you just to discard a card from your hand at random, like these, which is kind of unfortunate. But Wild Ride actually gives you, it basically is neutral on its own, right? Because it'll draw you a new card and then it'll ask you to discard a card at random. So you could play Wild Ride for 6 and then it'll get Go Again, and then because you discarded a card with power 6 or more, you can go Claw and then Claw. Like, it's great. It's awesome. After that, we have Alpha Rampage. Alpha Rampage is a Rhinar specialization from Welcome to Wraith. It's a 3 for a 9. As additional cost, you have to discard a random card and you'll Intimidate on its own, right? Regardless if you discard a card with power 6. The best setup for this with Rhinar is discarding Massacre, right? So if you discard Massacre when you play Alpha Rampage will Intimidate on its own. You'll discard Massacre, which will make Rhinar intimidate your opponent because you discarded a power 6. And then because Massacre was discarded to pay the cost of a Brute attack action card, it'll Intimidate when it's discarded. So that alone will actually remove 3 cards from your opponent and leave them with 1 card to block a 9 power attack, which is incredible. After that, we have Pulping. Pulping is basically the same as Wild Ride, except if you discard the card with power 6 or more, it'll gain Dominate instead. And if it's defended with then less than 2 non-equipment cards, it'll gain Go Again. So if you attack this and your opponent doesn't want to block it, it'll actually get Go Again, even if you miss the discard, even if you discard like a non-attack or something that has less than 6 power. But the Dominate basically solidifies that, right? The Dominate kind of makes it so that unless if they have a defense reaction arsenal, it will be getting Go Again. Tear Limb from Limb is a blue. Brute attack, or a Brute action card that actually has no defense value at all. It doesn't block for anything. Costs 2. You'll draw a card and then discard a random card. If it's a card with power 6 or more, your next Brute attack will get +X, where +X is its base power of the card you discarded. So if you basically, like most of the cards in this deck have 6 attacks, so you'll discard a 6 attack and then your next card that you play will get +6. And then of course you'll Intimidate as well from Rhinar's ability. Pummel is a generic attack reaction. You can play in the reaction window. Your club can be a target, and for 2 it'll give it +3, or a card that costs 2 or more will gain +3, and if it hits, the defending hero will discard a card. Most of these things in this deck are big, strong attacks that all cost more than 1. I actually don't think we have any 1-cost card attacks besides Savage Swing, which is usually just there to pitch. So Pummel usually has a lot of very good targets. And then we're just playing all the defense reactions, so cards like Fate Foreseen, Sink Below, Unmovable. These are all just cards that are just there for defensive capabilities. So with that being said, I have my very professional, poorly handwritten sideboard guide that I've been using at all these ProQuests. So we're going to just kind of start running down the list. So hey everyone, good morning. This is just a few hours before I'll be heading out to my last ProQuest. I actually just wanted to come and re-record the sideboard guide, because when I was originally making the video, I think what ended up happening was I spent too much time talking about the introductory mechanics of Rhinar, breaking down every individual card, even ones that were arguably not very important to the deck. And I think that's okay, and I think there's a place for that. But if there's anyone who wanted a very complex, robust sideboard guide, trying to learn individual matchups and like ways to play around it, then I just wanted to provide that as well. So for Starvo, very general overview of how we're going to want to play that matchup is blocking sometimes with 2 or 3 cards a turn, assuming that they're going to have fused, right? You can block 1 on the dominate attack, and then you can block once or twice on the hammer, depending on what is in your hand. And then we're going to always be looking to trade back with the club. Ram Shield and Crown are the only defensive maneuvers that Starvo will probably use, unless if they have a bad hand and they actually just feel better blocking. So because of that, Ram Shield is a card that will get 3 points of value if you ever break the combat chain, but if we just attack once, then they lose 2 points of value, like 2 points of blocking with Ram Shield that they would normally get for free on any other turn, especially coming in as a dash player. Like, the amount of value they get from Ram Shield is incredible in that matchup, and this is just like a club for 4. So they can crown and they can shield once for 1, and they'll take 2 points of damage every turn. So if you're able to like sometimes block out their damage or like keep pace with them, like taking like maybe like 4 or 5 damage a turn on average against Starvo, which is normally what will happen with the dominate attacks if you then choose to either block once on the hammer or block twice. You'll find ways. You'll find ways to like keep pace with them. And that's pretty much it. So I also think Barraging Beatdown is a very good card in this matchup. The main reason why is because Starvo wants to keep usually about 4 cards in hand, right? Like sometimes they'll keep 3 if that's like feasible, but most of the time like they want to keep 4, right? So Barraging Beatdown basically off of a 2-card hand will allow you to play Barraging Beatdown, remove a blocking option from them, and then come in with a club. And you're basically asking the Starvo if they want to just like not have a turn next turn, right? Because they need it, right? It's why a lot of people are sideboard teching pummels, because they're able to disrupt their hands at all. They like have trouble fusing and having the same explosive turns. So Barraging Beatdown will actually normally be a 2-card hand that'll normally come in for either 6, 7, or 8 into Starvo. It allows you to block twice on your own turn, on the Starvo's turn, because you can block the dominate attack once and then the hammer for once. Assuming you have a blue in hand, you'll be able to pay 1 for the Barraging Beatdown through the Frostbite, and then 2 for the Romping Club. Because of this, we want to be as efficient with our blocks as possible. So cards like Pulping and Wild Ride are actually coming out because they don't have block values. Same goes for Tear Limb from Limb. And then in terms of what cards are coming in from the sideboard, we're going to be, of course, putting in Pummels. I've won games. Clubbing for 4. The Starvo wants to get greedy with blocking so they don't disrupt their hands too much, and then you can like pummel and close out the game, or you can come in with a big attack. They'll block and go down to like 3 cards, right? So they can keep like a perfect fuse, and then you'll pummel and completely disrupt their turn. That's normally how I'm looking to play that matchup. Unmovables are the best card in the sideboard. Honestly, if I was expecting more Starvo today, which I'm not at the time of this recording, I'm mostly just going over like my thoughts and my game plan for today. I'm expecting a ton of Viserai. I'm expecting a lot of Prism. I definitely do think there will be Starvos there though, but I am comfortable with 3. If like for some reason your field is going to be all Starvo, you can maybe make an argument for running 4 and putting in a yellow, which also means it can pitch to club. This card is amazing. This is what makes the matchup winnable. Under one circumstance, you will put this in your arsenal, and you will tell yourself, and I've gone over this in the dash video as well, you'll basically tell yourself, I will never play this card unless if the Starvo plays Crippling Crush, Oakenold, or Oakenold, right? Like, for dash, like sometimes you'll care about Spinal Crush, just because removing Go Again is pretty brutal for the pistols, because that's how you're going to keep tempo with them. But in Rhinar, you're just pitching once to club, so you don't really care about Spinal Crush. Not to mention, if for some reason you did need to play 2 cards, Scab Skins are an option. Scab Skins require an action, and they give you action points. You don't, you're actually not using Go Again if you get 2 action points off of Scab Skins. And just because of how tight our sideboard slots are, our arm equipment into Starvo is actually Gamblin's Gloves, so you actually can roll in that matchup. Not that you really should. We just don't have another slot for it. You can make an argument for running Skull Crushers and finding a card to remove for that. I think that would be pretty good as well. So for that same reason, we also need these in Arsenal to get around dominate attacks. So Sometimes Fate Foreseen and Sync, if you have one in your arsenal and one in hand, and then you block with armor, you can shut down the really, really big, scary Starvo turns. But also you can just use these to like mitigate damage, right, from like the Autumn's Touches and the Evergreens, because I mean those will normally leak damage, and this is a good way to kind of circumnavigate that. It also allows you to block Whale for 1 card in hand. You shouldn't always do that. I actually think it's pretty inefficient. It's much better just to block with 3 from hand and maybe either take a Frostbite or block with 2. But if it seems like there are definitely games where you need to fully block the hammer with 1 card and keep a 3-card hand, or maybe even a 4-card hand without any disruption to come back and close out the game. So that can be good for that as well. A very interesting card that makes 0 sense in this matchup, and I'll explain why. Should be pretty obvious maybe to anyone. Command and Conquer is horrible into Starvo. It's horrible into Oldhim. It's arguably not good into Old Bravo either. You probably shouldn't play them. They're absolutely fine blocking. This is only a really good 4-card into greedier decks that want to keep multiple card hands. And if you're asking like, well, hey, Starvo wants to keep multiple card hands, just ask yourself, where is their arsenal? Because they can get rid of it at instant speed, and they will every turn. They're already using Crown of Seeds anyway. They're ending your turn with no arsenal at all. There's absolutely no reason for you to play Command and Conquer, right? Like what? They like arsenal like the off card in their hand, and then you just play Command and Conquer, and there's like a blue like Winner's Grasp in there. Like they're filtering it anyway. There's no reason for this card in this matchup. It's great, right? If Starvo's good, then your deck got $300 cheaper, because now you don't need Command and Conquer. So right now we're at 10 cards. The last card I'm willing to remove is actually 1 Alpha Rampage. This is really good into sort of more traditional Guardians. Decks that want to be blocking out their whole hand, you deny them the ability to do that. If you find a way to triple Intimidate, then you're essentially giving this you're basically playing this as a 3 for 9 with Dominate, right? We're just like playing bad Starvo at that point. But yeah, Starvo doesn't care about blocking a whole lot from hand, but the card does block for 3, so it's pretty good for efficiently blocking out that damage. So we are keeping it in the deck. And then I think more importantly, you will need to close out games eventually, right? If you've been keeping pace with the Starvo and you're getting low enough, they will start all of a sudden being fully defensive and maybe just coming back in with the hammer for 4 every turn. You will need a card that will actually close out the game, and Alpha Rampage will do it. So the game plan of Starvo is playing as defensively as possible. You don't want to get too explosive on them unless they have a really bad off turn, in which case you should. You'll need to understand when that's the case. Starvo will completely brick on hands. They will have hands that will just pitch to play like the hammer, and they'll keep all their cards too, right? Like you'll just come in with the club, so they're not expecting like to have a whole lot of hand disruption, and so maybe they'll just block and then like crown, and then they'll find out that actually their hand can't fuse at all. And so I've seen like things like that where a Starvo keeps a 4-card hand and literally just plays Winter's Wail for 4. Sometimes with Frostbite, sometimes even without Frostbite, right? They can't find the ice card, or they'll play one of the bad attacks in their hand. They'll play like Blue Frostfang. I've seen that. So like Blue Frostfang has been played as the only card in a turn on me against Starvo. Like if you're playing against the aggressive versions, it's just really bad. They have really bad off turns. And at that point, you're gonna keep like a pretty explosive hand, right? Like you'll probably just have one. You were planning on blocking it anyway, but now maybe you can come in for like a ton of damage. And you just want to kind of like, you have to trust the process on this one. If you're looking to like raise Starvo or like do a ton of damage to them all like throughout the game, I'm like, sorry, it's just not the deck for that. There's other decks to play out there. We're going to be playing very patiently, very consistently. Just like you can kind of just turn your brain off, block for 9 and club for 4 every turn. And throughout the game, you'll just kind of keep pace with Starvo. Of course, if they can high roll you, it will happen. This deck is like probably the best deck in the format, and we're playing like a very like rogue-like deck. So don't expect it to work out, but I actually wouldn't say that the matchup is completely horrible. We actually have a really good defensive package. Reckless Swing can also be played in this deck, which is really cool, and you actually don't care about the card loss sometimes, because if it's dominated, you're not, blocking anyway. So yeah, that's pretty much the Starvo guide. Just be patient and trust the process. That club for 4 will get 2 damage in through them every turn, or we'll remove a card from their hand and then look to close out the game. when they get low enough. But you have to be very careful. So obviously you want to preserve your life total as much as possible. Save defense reactions, especially immovable, for the very big cards. They will come very quickly in the game. Like they have 6. They have 3 Crippling Crush and 3 Oakenold. So if you like put a movable in your arsenal and they play like a 9 dominate attack with no on hit, it'll be really tempting just to like use it then. I think the only case where you would ever want to use it is maybe if you're like sitting on like more defense reactions in hand, right? Like if you have like another movable in your hand, then like, yeah, maybe it's acceptable then. You'll just have to read those hands yourselves. But that's the general guide. Okay, moving on to Viserai, which is probably another one of the top 3 contenders in the format. We haven't figured it out. I'm going to be very honest. That deck is extremely elusive. It's very difficult to play into. It's extremely flexible. I think it's probably one of the strongest decks in the format, just in its play style and what it has access to, its synergy, its card pool. I do think that Starvo has the better ability to win events because it can high roll. I think that a good Viserai pilot, though, will sometimes be able to outmaneuver Starvos, except for like very high variance matches. And if anything ever happens to Starvo, I think you'll see Viserai probably become like one of the best decks in the format. Prism right now is mostly a check to Starvo. It's not completely in the Prism's favor, but it's a much better matchup than Viserai to Starvo. So you're mostly seeing Prism as a response to Starvo. I think that Viserai will become probably one of the strongest decks, if not the strongest deck, if Starvo is removed, along with probably the other Rune Blades, which all can play pretty well into Prism. So I will tell you what has worked for me into Viserai, and I'll say that with the caveat that I don't know if I figured out this matchup. It's very tough. My local scene has extremely good Viserai players. What I have noticed is that aggro can work, right? So I'll leave this up to your discretion. Aggro can work. You can, obviously we're going to be siding in Norrin Gloves, and you could bring in Claws, right? You could bring in Tear Limb from, well, let's talk about Tear Limb from in a second, but obviously you could bring in that. You could bring in Pulping, you could bring in Wild Ride, right? Like you could, that's 9 cards. I would remove like 2 Alpha Rampage because these are mostly to go tall over like pretty defensive decks. It's not as necessary here. And so you could bring in these, right? Obviously bring the Command and Conquers back in. Viserai is always going to be looking to arsenal a really strong cards. So probably things like Sonata or cards like Revel in Runeblood will probably sit in the Viserai player's arsenal and wait for the best optimal turns to play them. Mordred maybe as well. So actually pressuring the arsenal is a very good way to catch Viserai out. They get very greedy with their arsenal. Part of that is because they do have a fridge. They have Skullcap, Skulletta, and actually but nowadays they've been running Quill Hand, which actually is 2 less block. They can block with creepers if they want to, but I think Command and Conquer is very good into them, or it'll require them to give you 2 cards from hand, and Viserai playing on a 3-card hand is much weaker. They don't have the same level of synergy. So, and for that reason, you want to bring in Pummel to either hit their hand or on the back of a Command and Conquer, which will completely blow them out and leave them without a turn. Just crazy. And can really get tempo in your favor. So I think if you want to try a more aggressive package, you could do it like this. But what I've been playing is a little bit more grindy with the club. I don't know if it's correct, but it has worked. I was able to win my game that got me in the top 8 off of a club build into Viserai against a very skilled Viserai pilot who has been a finalist at some of these other local events. But Tear Limb from Limb is actually in this deck for 2 reasons. One, you're able to go very big and tall on an attack, but actually more interestingly, it actually ups your blue count in a Viserai. If you replace it like Alpha Rampage with it, actually ups your blue count in the deck, so now you can efficiently pay for Rune Chance more often. Normally the problem is you get stuck with all yellow hands and you actually want to pay for Rune Chance. The problem is that all your cards in your hand basically block 1 less Rune Chance than they normally would, or if you want to pay for Rosetta as well. So I'll just swap out these. Obviously, Alpha Rampage is a card we're only looking to play into very defensive decks. I can see an argument to play it, right? It is a 3 for a 9. That is pretty good. The only problem is it will require a 3-card hand. You could try it in a more aggressive build if you would like. 9 damage is definitely a lot. For that reason, we're going to be removing the claws here. We're going to be bringing in Romping Club. I can also see an argument for maybe replacing Skullcap with Skullhorn so we can preserve our life total and efficiently pay for Rosetta Thorn. The only problem is Viserai has a lot of very good on-hits, right? With like, they won't run Consuming Volition as much anymore, but Mauvrian's guys, red or yellow, which they'll play it in aggro. If they're going to play into Rhinar, you want to anticipate that they're going to play the aggressive tempo version, which is going to be playing cards like Quillhand, all the Mauvrian Skies, Revel in Runeblood, Swarming Gloomveil. Like, these are all like very aggressive cards, and a lot of these are going to have on hits, right? Like Mauvrian Skies red and yellow will give them 3 or 2 rune chance if their attack does any damage to you. Swarming Gloomveil has probably one of the strongest on hits in the game right now, outside of like obviously like the massive like Guardian cards, but for a 0 cost, it's crazy. They will obviously be playing cards like Meet and Greet, which if you would like to deny them a rune chant for some reason, it's not bad. So there's an argument for both. We would need to do more testing. I plan on doing more testing. I think for today, when I go into and I play against Viserai and I want to go club, I will just still default to Skullcap. I think you're fine leaking 1 point of damage a turn from Rosetta Thorn. If you're coming back for 1 as well, because they're probably not going to block with 2 cards. So if you just come back in for club for 4, they'll probably either take all 4 or they'll block 3 and take 1. And so you're both leaking a point of damage every turn, assuming you're paying 1 null rune or to your null rune gloves for the Rosetta Thorn and taking 1. In this matchup, you're obviously looking to just keep a club behind to attack them with, trying to efficiently pay for rune chance, and blocking very strong on hits. You normally just out of principle want to block any card that comes after Mauvrian's guys. Why give them free value, right? I actually really like Barrage and Beatdown in this matchup because it's kind of the same thing as Starvo, where aggro, tempo, whatever you want to call it, Viserai is looking to keep normally 4 to 5 card hands. Barrage and Beatdown basically says, like, do you want to take a quarter of your life total off of a club swing, right? If it's like red, you're coming in for 8. Or I guess that's a 5th. Do you want to take like a 5th of your life total? Or do you want to like basically not have a very strong turn? And most of the time the Viserai players will say no. I've even played this in my top 8 game against Viserai, and the player like just saw a club for 8 with red Barrage and Beatdown and said no blocks and took 8. And of course, like, we still lost because the deck is just very explosive. But surprisingly, Wild Ride and Pulping are actually not bad in club builds. I normally prefer them in the club builds because not blocking is a liability. I think you actually maybe could run them in club builds if you want to maybe try this more aggressive back and forth version of Rhinar, where you actually want to be defensive when you can, but maybe you want to be a little bit more explosive when the Viserai has an off turn, which will maybe happen sometime. Because Pulping and Wild Ride will be 6s with Go Again, but because you've discarded, it allows you to actually come in with the Romping Club afterwards. So you pay 4 resources, which could be like a blue and a tunic or something, or 2 yellows, and then you'll come in for 11 on that turn. So it's not bad. But typically for me, what I want to do is bring in all the 0 for 4 D reacts because of all the break points of 4 in Viserai, especially now Swarming Gloomveil. Is this going to be very good to like keep, I don't know, keep your life total as preserved as possible and like slowly grind down that matchup. So on the sideboard, we're going to have 10 cards. And then what is the one that I'm forgetting? Oh, sorry, just kidding. According to my sideboard guide, what we're going to do is we're actually going to remove all the alpha rampages, which I can understand. Especially because you actually need 3 card hands to play alpha rampage, which is not as efficient. If we're just looking to block out as much as possible with club, there's not much of a reason to do so. And so because of that, it's mostly going to look like this. With the caveat that you could also maybe remove the Fate for Scenes or the Sink Belows. I actually like to keep Fate for Scene. Normally I like Sink Below more, but the thing with Fate for Scene is that in this deck you're going to have a lot of like draw and discard effects, or like if you're going to discard Beast Within and you look at the top card and it's Blood Rush Bellum, if you banish that card off Beast Within, like you probably just like have a very hard time winning the game at that point. So I do prefer Fate for Scene. You can actually go Pulping as well, right? I actually like this the most. This is what my sideboard guide says for Viserai. I actually still, I think, like this the most. The reason why is because even if you whiff on pulping, you're basically getting 2 cards out of your opponent and putting Viserai down to either a 2 or a 3 card hand. Viserai will probably not want to do that. And I've, once again, experienced Viserai players in a ProQuest at high level tables seeing a pulping that is actually whiffed and saying no blocks and giving it go again anyway. So because of that, if you are ever behind on tempo and you need to crawl back in, I think it's a very good card. You also want to keep your 6 powers high, especially if you're going to play cards like Tear Limb from Limb. You do want to have access to that many, especially if you're going to play Pulping. And Pulping the Pummel can also be a game closer. So moving on to the last one, we have Prism. For Prism, we're going to play as aggressive as possible. We're going to be obviously bringing in Gambler's Gloves, looking to clear auras on the board if we're not looking to pressure in life total. It's a very tricky matchup post Everfest. I wouldn't actually even confidently say it's Prism or Rhinar favored anymore. It's going to be a little bit tough for you. There's a lot of navigation. I'm still kind of learning that matchup more post Everfest, knowing when it's the right time to clear auras, when it's not. Before, it was like a very easy slam dunk for Rhinar. They're never able to play a Herald, and they only have like a few instant speed auras that you actually care about. But now it's a lot more difficult. But we're just going to remove all of the D-reacts. We do not care. The only thing we would use these on is Heralds, which we can block and pretty much break Phantasm with any card in the deck almost. A lot of times you'll end your Prism game and your Scab Skins and your Arcanite will actually still be completely untouched because you actually never needed to block with them. Sometimes you can block auras. Actually, that's normally what I do. I just block auras with them if I need to. But because of that, like these are coming in and the 2 pummels are coming out. And so this is pretty much going to be like a full aggro package. We're going to bring in Mandible Claw. Obviously, we're going to be looking for these really big explosive Blood Rush Bellow turns. Claw for 5, another card for maybe like 8 or 10 is really good. The new line now, post Everfest, is Claw for 10 damage, and then Swing Big for 20. Because Swing Big will come in for 10. That only requires 6 resources to do. You can stick one of them in your arsenal if you'd like to. It's very, very good, especially if Blood Rush Bellow is drawing you 2 fresh cards. Massacre is still another way to go. It'll be a 10 as well with an Intimidate trigger. It'll just cost 1 more. So Swing Big is normally a little bit more effective. Or Pulpings and Wild Rides on Blood Rush Bellow turns will be 8s with Go Again. So I've had games where I've gone like Wild Ride for 16 and then Swing Big for 26. Crazy stuff. So you're looking to just like rush down the Prism player while still being careful and clearing auras when you have to. Knowing that's the case, that's part of the reason also why we run Mandible Claw, is that we can roll a Scab Skins, get 2 action points, and because these are once per turn actions, we can go Claw, and take out 2 auras. If we had a club, we could only do it with 1, and then we'd have to use a whole attack on another card. Into Prism, if you suspect they're playing an aura, it's actually sometimes best to play one of the 0-cost Intimidate cards. I really love Barraging Beatdown into Prism. We run 9 and now we run High Roller, which is another version of it. You'll see in some of the gameplay videos on my channel that actually a lot of times Prisms are unable to play auras after being intimidated with these cards. Like sometimes you'll either hit the blue pitch that they needed to play it, or you'll actually hit the aura itself. Very, very strong. And so the Prism player is then like basically like forced into a decision of, do they want to play the aura immediately in response to your Intimidate and then like lose sometimes like the only last card in their hand. At that point, if it's a bad aura, right, then like if you play like Red Barrage and Beatdown, they have now 0 cards in hand, right, because they use like 3 cards to play their aura, and now they lose the last card in their hand, and you can come in and hit them hard for like 15 damage or something. It's completely open season at that point. Or now you have full information of all the auras that are on the board, and now you can act accordingly, right? Like, do I just want to like use my action point for the turn? Like if I force them to play Genesis like this, like do we just like Claw Genesis, or do we roll Scab Skins and Claw 2, or do I like attack them and then like have Go Again or an action point and then clear the aura? It's very good. It forces the Prism player to not play at instant speed, which is exactly what you want in that matchup. Great card. I really can't recommend it enough. So that's pretty much the main tiers of the meta. I would say you're probably 50-50 into good Prism players, if not maybe a little bit unfavored. All the aura builds are very hard to clear through. Against bad Prism players or Herald focused versions, you'll absolutely crush them. Just don't get greedy, right? That's probably the biggest thing. I think all my games that I lose against Prism with this deck is because I'm a little bit too cocky with how strong I think the matchup is, and then I'll make like very obvious misplays. Against Starvo, you're probably pretty evenly favored if you play consistently and don't try to do any like crazy shenanigans or greed really hard for aggro turns. And Viserai, you're definitely unfavored, but you will be able to get there sometimes. Sometimes variance will play on your side. So moving on to the less represented heroes in the meta, we're going to start with Chane. Chane, you're just looking to full fatigue. Pretty much from the beginning, I don't think you can race Chane very efficiently. I would just stick to a full fatigue plan where you're just looking to keep your life total as high as possible and wait for them to banish out their entire deck. So because of that, we actually want to remove any card that does not block for 3 because we're looking to block with all 4 cards in hand every turn. Because of that reason, also the Sinks and Fates are coming in. We're not going to use Unmovable. They have a lot of very small attacks that are normally like 2s, 3s, and 4s. Not as necessary. Sometimes you will be able to come back in with the club sometimes if they have an off turn. So because of that, we'll be bringing in club. In terms of equipment, actually the argument now is to run Skullhorn, which I partially agree with, and I've also asked my very experienced Chane players in my area. And Skullhorn does make sense because you're looking to preserve your life total as much as possible. So being able to pay for Rosetta Thorn every turn is probably what you want to do. Especially with yellows in this deck. The problem is like you can rely on Arcane Barrier 3 against Skullcap with Skullcap, but the problem is you often won't actually have the ability to pay for it a lot of times. So we're just going to do Skullhorn for now, and we'll reevaluate later. Also, they don't have a whole lot of on-hit effects, and their attacks are normally very small. I wouldn't really worry too much about having Skullcap to cover up like a breakpoint or something. Shadow Puppetry is tough, but at that point they're usually using a few cards to play it. You're able to block with a few cards from hand. And then we're going to run Nullring Gloves because they will try to Ursa lock you at the end of the game, or they will have 1 blue left in deck. They'll have Ursa out, and they'll go Ursa for, they'll Soul Shackle Ursa for 6, which requires 2 cards from hand to block. They'll pitch 2 resources to Grasp of the Arcanite to make a rune chant, and then the last resource to come in for Rosetta. So you have to block Rosetta and then use a card to pitch to block the arcane. So if you're at 1, you're hard Ursa locked. And they'll actually just fatigue you instead, unless if they have like Carrion Husk broken, which I don't think will really happen. That's not really what we're trying to do here, although you can club them back, right, if they're not like fully pressuring your hand. It's a good way to at least keep some pressure on the Chane player. So because of that, we are going to run Nullring Glove. A lot of times they will pitch the Grasp somewhere along the line. It doesn't even have to be at post Ursa, but so that's pretty much it. Let's see, we have 7, we have 12 cards here, so I guess is this correct? I guess you could put 1 Pummel back in the deck if you would like to. I actually do think that if you're able to CNC Pummel, it's pretty good, especially because they'll normally block the CNC with Carrion Husk, so you can actually blow them out pretty hard that way. So just only because we do need 1 card back in the deck, and from all of these, it is the card that can block the best. They will have a lot of 1s and 2s, so I actually think you will find an optimal block with it. So with that out of the way, let's move on to Lexi, which I think is another like very good like sleeper contender. I'll actually say Lexi is probably the hardest deck to sideboard for, because there are 3 versions now, and you do not know which one they're on, unless you know the player personally. There is an ice version, which is going to be taxing you a lot. It's going to be revealing ice cards to frostbite you. And they're going to be going tall with like discard or frostbite effects with on hits. You'll also find versions now that play Bolt and Shot, Art of War, cards like that. Rain Razors, where now it's actually like almost no fuse. It's just kind of like raw damage effects. That's also going to be a thing. And then you'll finally have like the lightning builds, which are going to be looking to lightning fuse a lot for a lot of go again attacks. That'll have like electrify on hits, that'll deal additional damage. Because of that, it's honestly very tough. You could even make an argument for just going full aggro, because of the fact that Lexi blocks horribly, and they run a lot of instants and a lot of 2 blocks. So if you actually intimidate, like, and get lucky, sometimes they're just left with 2 blocks or instants that can't block, and their armor blocks horribly. So if you're unsure and you can't figure out if you think there's gonna be a lot of Lexis and you just don't want to even bother, you could just go like full aggro right and just bring in the claws. Look to have like big gambler glove turns where you roll scab skins, and then bring in this whole package, right? So you could go full aggression. I personally still kind of like club though, because you can eventually fatigue them. You can actually look to play a fatigue version of that game, where Lexi is on borrowed time with attacks. So a lot of decks can actually endlessly attack with their weapon in theory, but Lexi is the only hero that actually can run out of attacks because she needs an arrow attack action card, and that's the synergy with her weapon. So she has no more arrows left, her bow does nothing, and her deck does nothing. So I'm pretty comfortable with fatigue version. Pummel on CNC is the most brutal thing Lexi could ever think of. You obviously want that. Now the issue with the and because the we're fine keeping a block 3 with Alpha Rampage, but obviously like we're probably not looking to play it. It's mostly there to block on certain turns where we need it to. We just want to have like no non-block cards in here. Now the problem is the 0-cost defense reactions. Now the issue is that if it's Ice Lexi, it's actually going to be very, very difficult to use these efficiently, because if they flip over an ice card, now all of a sudden your sink below costs 1, which is kind of a very big problem. I still would say you should just run them because they're very good to the 2 other versions of it, and it seems like the ice version is a little bit less popular right now. And you can just wait for an off turn. They won't have a frostbite given to you every turn. Sometimes the frostbite will be on the back of an arrow, in which case you actually can play the defense reaction. So just set them in arsenal, wait for really good cards to come. I can't really tell you what the good ranger cards are. You'll just have to evaluate them. Just look at them, look at your hand, and see how bad they'll screw you up. Same goes for Azalea pretty much. But once again, there is an argument to go aggro into these 2 versions into these 2 decks, right? Because they don't block very well, and they'll trip themselves up on damage because of how awkward loading the bow is sometimes. Into dash, if you're worried about dash, you're pretty much just looking to aggro down that deck as hard as you can. They won't be able to get their pistol items out fast enough. Even without Arc Smash, you're going to have a really easy time in that deck. And they're going to want to try to block out as much as possible. Play a more controlling version or a mid-range version while they get items out. So just bring in Alpha Rampage and you'll be good. And so with that, you're going to side out all the defense reactions. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So let me make sure, because it seems like there is nope. That's pretty much it. Yep, you're just looking to do that, and you're gonna want to go claws here. So that will be your dash sideboard. So pretty easy. Just do big attacks, have fun. Into Briar. We're looking to also grind out that matchup. I just don't think you can race as efficiently as Briar. They have so many break points that give very strong effects to them, including the embodiment of Earth tokens. So we're going to be removing all of the non-blocks once again. We're going to be putting in this defensive package. They don't go tall enough, they go wide, so we don't care about unmovable here. We're looking to go club. And much like Viserai, you can make an argument for Skullhorn, but I think they just have too many breakpoints. You're going to need armor, but you're still going to want to keep 1 null rune just because like you're not using Gambler's Gloves anyway, let's be honest. So with this, we have 10 cards in sideboard. It's probably just correct here just to remove like 1 Alpha Rampage. A lot of times we're just cutting 1 Alpha Rampage and leaving 2 in the deck. Sometimes as a game finisher, but also just as a 3 block. And you're looking to just like, once again, club every turn, block damage as efficiently as possible. You can pummel CNC them because much like Viserai and Chane, they're going to want to keep like a card in arsenal and basically wait for the most explosive turn to play it. You can punish them really hard for it. And also pummel is very good into Briar because she normally wants to keep 4 or 5 card hands, much like Viserai. So if you ever feel like they're trying to pivot, you could just like take damage, come back with pummel, and like try to shut them down from what they were planning on doing. Into Kano, we're getting in the very, very, very bottom tiers. And then we'll actually talk about traditional guardian and the mirror matchup, and then we'll close it out. But into Kano, we're gonna be running basically a full aggro package. You have Arcane Barrier 3 because of Skullhorn, so I don't know what more you would want. You're just going to try to rush them down as much as possible, as fast as possible. We're going to be going Arcane Barrier 3 into Kano. They're 30 life. We've already talked about lines so far that can do like 20 or 26 damage off of Blood Rush Bellows that almost one-shots the Kano. Actually, Alpha Rampage will come in just because it's such a aggressive card, and you're just looking to kill them faster than they can kill you. And so Pummel's good here. Pummel's very good on CNC into Kano. It's also good into them as well. So with that being said, we're going to bring in all of these. We're going to take out these. So right now we're at 11 cards. But actually, I could see an argument for wanting to keep Tearlim from them in. It's extremely explosive if you can play it properly. And it's a blue pitch. So actually, I would probably consider maybe removing 2 Alpha Rampages and just keeping 1. And bringing in Tearlim from Limb. So I would probably do it like this. Intimidate effects, much like Prism, are extremely good into Kano because it forces the Kano to then decide if they want to play on your turn. Because like, let's say they have like a Sonic Boom in their hand or something, and they're gonna like, or maybe like a blue pitch to Kano opt, and maybe they have like a blue and 3 reds. If you intimidate and take the blue, then all of a sudden they can't play on your turn. So if a Kano player or like if they have snapbacks in hand, like there's so many things. Like there's so many speed Kano cards, and they could be in Arsenal or they could be in hand. But they're also going to need cards from hand to pitch to play cards in Arsenal, right? So you basically force a Kano player in the same way that if they're smart enough, they'll either decide to basically take the turn off and not play on your turn, which is the same thing with Prism, and then you can like kind of read it where it's like, oh, they're not playing, I'm playing on my turn, or very much at all. So now I can just kind of like go very linear and just go for damage, or they'll play in response, which is what the Kano player doesn't want to do, right? Because they want you to attack, they want you to pay a discard effect, and so now you have like 1 or maybe 2 cards in hand, and now they have like full range to like play big wizard spells, and you won't have enough to pay through the Arcane Barrier. So because of that, we're just going to keep our blue count high. And we're going to play a lot of these Barrage and Beatdown, High Roller, Intimidate style effects, which is the reason why we actually probably want to keep, if I can find it here, Pack Hunt in here as well. So 2 for 6 with Intimidate. You can pitch and play it, keep 1 or 2 cards in hand, and now the Kano player is forced to like kind of respond at that point. Also, another thing too is if the Kano player goes off and they can't kill you, then all of a sudden like they have no cards in hand, Barrage and Beatdown is a +4, and you can probably, with 30 life, like they've probably already taken damage so far, you might be able to still one-shot them from there. Now finally for the mirror, and then we'll cover Guardian real quick, even though I don't think you'll see very many traditional Guardians with the prevalence of Prism. But for the mirror, we're just going to look to grind it out. You could go aggressive and hope variance goes on your side. I don't really want to do that. I don't want to take that risk. So because of that, we're going to be going back to Club. We're going to be going to Club, Gambler Gloves, and Skullcap here. Maybe one day Rhinar will get the Runeblade package and be able to do arcane damage. That would be fun. Pummel will come in, especially because as a Rhinar player, we probably understand we want to be arsenaling cards like Command and Conquer, cards like Reckless Swing maybe, cards like Swing Big, or especially the most obvious answer is Blood Rush Bellows. So Command and Conquer is actually going to be very good at threatening our opponent's arsenal if they're trying to set up a very explosive turn, because it's just going to be mostly like a grind matchup, and then one person's going to have their very explosive Blood Rush Bellow turn. It'll be good stuff. It'll be good stuff. So in terms of what's coming out, I would say Pulpings, Tear Limb from Limb is just not needed. We would like to block right, because the problem is with Intimidate is that if we have non-blocks, we can get caught with them in hand, right? If the Rhinar intimidates us 3 times and the last card in our hand is Tear Limb from Limb, or Pulping, then all of a sudden we're taking all the damage, and we would obviously prefer not to do that. I would like to keep in all of the 0-cost D-reacts and keep them in Arsenal, even for very big Intimidate turns. The main reason why is because of cards like Barraging Beatdown, right? Or even like Pulping or Barraging Bighorn. These are cards that get a bonus if we block with less than 2 cards from hand. Normally Rhinar is going to try to set these up in a way that They either intimidate 3 times or pulping gains dominate. But if it says less than 2 non-equipment cards, it doesn't specify where, right? So like if they play pulping and they discard, and so it has dominate. If we block with a card from hand, which is the only card we can block with from hand, and then we play Sink Below from Arsenal, it actually shuts down the go again from pulping. So we're looking to bring in all of these, right? And then we're going to bring in pummels. So right now we have, removing wild rights. We now have 10 cards out here. I would say just cut one more Alpha Rampage. I think that's probably acceptable. Maybe there's a different answer, but Alpha Rampage is normally my go-to cut. It's just a very expensive card. It requires you to have a very big hand to do it, and a lot of times into a matchup like this where you're grinding with club, it's just not optimal to keep these 3-card hands, right? But you can still keep it there as a game closer or as a card to block 3 with. Finally, moving into Guardian. Traditional Guardians, we can actually get away playing aggro into them, so we're going to bring back in Claws, but we are going to bring in Alpha Rampage because this card is very good into Guardian. Sometimes double or triple intimidating them. If you sequence it by discarding Massacre to it, you'll triple intimidate them. If you do it after Barraging Beatdown, which is very easy to do on a 4-card hand, right? You can have Alpha Rampage, Barraging Beatdown, Massacre in hand, and then you start by playing the Barraging Beatdown. So you have 3 cards left in hand, and let's say the last one is a blue, or you have a 3-pitch and a tuna counter. You just pay like that. You play Alpha Rampage. Now the only card left in your hand to discard is Massacre. So now you quadruple intimidate your opponent. They now have no hand. And like Alpha Rampage comes in for 13, right? So pretty good. So we're looking to kind of do that into Guardian. Reduce all of their blocking capabilities. Cards like Barrage and Beatdown will remove the effectiveness of cards like that they're going to be playing, like Unmovable or Staunch Response, right? Because they're going to want to either have that card in hand, or they're going to obviously want the resources to play them. So you can take one or the other sometimes. I would actually say take out the defense reactions, as nice as they may seem. They will have big dominate attacks, especially with things like Okanold in Oldhim, or the dominant Crippling Crush in the old Bravo, even though it's much less efficient. Because you can bring in Immovable, right? You don't want to get completely blown out by it. But we are going to be bringing in like the Pulping package. Dominate will really close out these games sometimes, although you do have to be careful because sometimes they will play defense reactions in Arsenal. So you actually maybe could bring in Wild Ride if you would like. But right now, we're also not going to really care about Tear Limb from Limb. So right now we're at 8. So let's see. What have I removed here? I think you can actually get rid of Pack Hunt as well. They're just gonna be able to efficiently block that very easily. I'm not really super concerned about that. We're not really looking to play a grindy match either. Like Pack Hunt is good on a 2-card hand because it's a 2-card hand that does 6 and removes a blocking choice from the opponent, but I just don't find it as useful here. I actually think you could remove 1 Pulping and just go 4 Pulpings and, 2 Pulpings and 2 Wild Rides. Wild Ride having unconditional going in will actually sometimes be better than Pulping. Sometimes Pulping can get shut down by a Guardian player who has Arsenal and defense reactions. Kind of the same philosophy that we talked about going into the mirror matchup. So yeah, I think that's everything. So that's what I'm planning on doing for today. I will probably give an update either on a community post in the Discord, or I could even make a separate video if we're lucky enough to get top 8 again and just do a quick breakdown of what happened throughout the day. But I hope this was informative. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do have any questions about certain lines you want to take, or strategies, or even like sideboard choices, main deck options into some of these decks, and you do have questions, feel free to reach out to me either through Discord if you're in the general Flesh and Blood Discord, or I'll probably be posting this on Reddit as well, so feel free to interact with those comments or just in the comments on this video. And I will I'm about to enter finals week right after this, but I will try my best to get around to everyone's questions. So I hope you all have a great day. I hope this was helpful, and yeah, if you're looking to play Rhinar, it's a fun deck, so good luck.